Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined by Rosie and Colin today. So Rosie has long COVID, so we're going to be talking a bit about that and her family's experiences. But Rosie's also a talented artist, so we're going to hear all about that as well. So welcome both of you to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
So to start with, and you can do this in whichever order you wish, would you mind introducing yourselves just a little bit?
I'm Rosie, I'm 17 years old, and I got COVID last year at the start of the school year, and I've been suffering with long COVID since.
And I'm Colin, I'm Rosie's dad, and I've been trying my very best, along with the rest of the family, to see Rosie through this very difficult last year.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here and for sharing your story, because it's so important to do that, isn't it? So would you mind sort of talking us through maybe will we talk about the initial illness to start with? How did that go for you?
Yeah, I never actually tested positive in the first place, but one of my close friends had tested positive and I had lost my sense of taste. So then after that, I isolated and I was pretty much okay. I think I had a high temperature a couple of days maybe, but apart from that, I was okay. And then it was after the isolation period when I was trying to get back to school that I started to struggle more.
Yeah, so it was after the sort of initial illness had actually passed where things started getting worse then for you.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's not interesting at all. We hate it, but it's fascinating, isn't it, in some ways? What were your symptoms that started happening when you were developing what became long COVID? How did that differ?
Initially, it was dizziness when I got up in the morning, and I was fainting, and then sort of headache started, and that was like a constant headache, and then the sort of just exhaustion and muscle pains.
And this exhaustion, I mean, you've experienced it for the last year, and I'm very familiar with it as well, and it's like nothing that you've ever experienced before, is it?
Yeah.
It's a completely, I don't know, I think I thought I understood being tired, and then suddenly this hits you and it's like, oh no, I was never tired before.
Yeah, it's tired to an extra extent.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you were a little bit further on through the pandemic when this happened to you, weren't you? Were you hearing about it from other people before it happened to you?
Not as much, no. I hadn't really heard of it before.
I mean, we were hearing from the start, weren't we, that, children and young people don't get long COVID or don't get COVID. And, we obviously know that to be completely untrue now. But
yeah,
did that stop you from getting any medical care or anything? What happened with any doctors that you were seeing at that point?
We went to the GP for lots of different blood tests and stuff. And it was only after, I actually don't remember how long it was, before they said, oh, it must be something to do with COVID.
It actually wasn't all that long when Rosie was first referred to the long COVID clinic. We'd seen various GPs within the practice, but they said, we don't know for sure, because there's no PCR test showing that Rosie has had COVID, what we're doing is we're making a kind of clinical diagnosis based on the sequence of contact and her symptoms and so on. So it was a bit kind of messy as to when, nobody just said, oh, right, yes, it's long COVID for sure. It was kind of like, it could be some other kind of post-viral stuff, but they were also then worried about checking, obviously, for other serious things that could be causing the same. What they sometimes describe a bit frustratingly as sort of non-specific symptoms. And I'm sure as a sufferer, they probably feel pretty specific to you.
Yes, exactly. And I had a similar problem where I didn't have a PCR test because they weren't testing at that point. And, a lot of people in a similar situation, it's like, well, you never even had COVID. So how can you have long COVID? And, don't you? What else was it going to be realistically? But because you don't have that one test, it just can make everything else a lot more difficult, or a lot more messy, as you described. So you ended up with the whole sort of bank of blood tests and everything coming back clear, and everyone telling you, oh well, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's reassuring in some ways, isn't it? But it's also, certainly for myself, I find it incredibly frustrating, where I almost want some of my tests to not come back clear because I know full well that there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. I find it frustrating as well.
I remember the GP ringing me while I was driving actually one day, maybe just from having dropped Rosie at school when she was still trying to go into school a bit, with the blood results. And he said, oh, well, they've all come back normal. And I must have made a sort of noise or given that kind of vibe. And he said, it's good. It's a good thing that it's normal because we're looking for things that could be problems. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But what we're hoping for is that you'll find something that you can treat, So yeah, all tests are normal. It's part of the long COVID experience, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, double-edged sword, I think, for sure. So yeah, this idea of ruling things out, it's yeah, like you say, it's good, but also you know that there's something. So yeah, intensely frustrating. So you mentioned that Rosie was still trying to go to school at that point. How was that? Was that difficult? Because I'm just thinking from my own experiences. I was trying to work from home for a while, and it just sucked the life out of me. I thought I was coping at the time, and looking back on it, was absolutely not. So I can't really imagine actually trying to be sort of in school on top of that.
Yeah, there were a couple of times where I tried getting up in the morning and just going in from the start of the day. And then we had a few meetings with my head of year to talk about how they could sort of help. And they sorted out a reduced timetable. But even with that, it still wasn't working very well. And I only ended up going in for an hour maybe for an art class every few weeks maybe.
What we were doing was I was downloading work that I could do offline. I was working remotely for the most part, and so I was downloading maybe a spreadsheet or something onto my laptop and going sitting in a cafe in a church around the corner from Rosie's school, so that I could still be working. But if Rosie rang me after half an hour and said, look, I can't cope with this, can you come and get me? Then I would go and get her. But we had a sort of prearranged time as well. But it was a kind of like, I can sit here, I've got work I could be getting on with, I can still be productive and keep my job, but at the same time, I can also try and be there to get you rather than have to drive half an hour across town and lift you if you're not feeling well. So it puts a lot of strain on things like that, and my work were very good in terms of flexibly adapting, to Rosie's needs. Really, it wasn't my needs, more hers, for which I'm enormously grateful, because life would have been so much harder if I'd had to be reporting into an office all the time or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess did having that option of escape from school, for wanting a better word, did that kind of relieve a bit of pressure as well for you, Rosie?
Yeah, it did, because I knew that I could sort of get away almost immediately if I needed to.
Yeah, definitely. The option to bail when needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have helped a lot. I mean, you just kind of touched on that, Colin, the impact on, obviously, it's Rosie that's feeling the physical symptoms and going through the actual illness, which is obviously completely awful, as I'm sure most people listening will be able to appreciate from their own experiences. But, we also know how widely this can affect not just the sufferer, but the sort of the close family and people you're living with, and wider than that as well. So this must have had a huge impact on sort of your family and obviously your work as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of elements to that. I mean, Rose's mum works in a school. She's a classroom assistant, and so she's got to be in school when she's in school. So the fact that I was able to work at home and take over the caring role as much as possible, certainly in the early days when Rosie didn't know what was going on, we didn't know what was going on, and she was, basically coming down, lying on the sofa in tears, and just, it was a really difficult time, and just sitting there on the sofa and holding her, and she's sobbing and saying, when am I going to get better? And of course you have no answers, and not really anything to offer in terms of pain relief or anything that actually made any difference. So that it was this time last year was very tough.
It's that the helplessness almost, isn't it? Maybe.
Yeah.
You would do anything, literally anything to help, wouldn't you? But you just can't, because you don't know what to do.
Or you don't know what to do, and the tools that you have don't have any effect. Rosie basically has had constant migraine for a year, over a year now, and so we trying ibuprofen, various painkillers and so on. And I remember saying to Rosie one day, well, you haven't said anything about your headache for a while. It must be getting better. And she said, no, Dad, I don't mention it because nothing you can do makes any difference. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, fair enough.
It's so tough, isn't it? I mean, I find myself doing it where I don't want to burden my partner with all of this stuff, because I know that there's not anything that he can do beyond what he already is. But at the same time, he's my support system. So, it's a tough one, isn't it? From both sides. Have you found anything that does help at all?
I find for the headaches, ice packs tend to help sort of ease it. And then for the muscle pains, like warm baths with like bath salts and stuff in them, that sometimes helps. And sort of hot water bottles and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, do you find you sort of develop your own strategies as well to kind of to cope with things, or to know when to stop and things like that?
Yeah, I've sort of got into a bit of like a routine of knowing when, like what I can do and what I can't do, and what will cause my head to hurt more, or for me to feel even more tired.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath, and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, totally. And that, I suppose, that sort of helps. Does that give you some sort of feeling of, I don't know if control is the right word, but a little bit of control over what's going on with you?
Yeah, it's a lot better than the start when we just didn't have any idea at all, and now I sort of can help it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're learning all the time, aren't you? And I find it very difficult to realize when things are getting better because everything is just so awful. But it does help me anyway to sort of look back and think, actually, that is better than it was. Do you feel like things have improved, even if not as much as you would want?
I think a bit, even if it's just in terms of handling it better.
I think actually that's the thing sometimes, isn't it? It's not necessarily that anything has improved. It's that you are managing things and you know what to do a lot better.
There's different elements to it with Rosie. I mean, we see the improvement in her probably more than she feels it, because it is gradual. She's in so much better place than she was 6 months ago. And she had applied to do her art course starting in September. But I'll be quite honest with you, up until about even July, I was thinking, how on earth is she going to manage this? It's just not going to happen. And then she's going to be heartbroken. But the two other things, apart from the fact that Rosie's much better at pacing and self-management, she started low-dose naltrexone and acupuncture in April. And that since then, we have seen improvement. Now, because we started those at the same time, plus there's been more time, plus Rosie's getting more experienced, it's hard to say to what extent any of those things has actually helped. But there is improvement. So in some ways, we don't care what's helping, we just take it and bank it.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. It's like, oh, but I want to know what it was. And then actually I think, you know what, it doesn't matter. You're right about it being very hard for the person suffering to be able to tell a lot of things themselves sometimes, I think. But yeah, you've kind of segued very nicely there into the art side of this. I'm a musician, so I've found, not to start with, actually, it was very frustrating to start with, but as time's kind of gone on a bit, I found creativity to be a really kind of good outlet, and something that I can do that fits around my symptoms, rather than some of the more active hobbies that I would have done beforehand. Is this what you found as well with your artwork, Rosie?
Yeah, even towards the start, I was still trying to do like coloring in books, and that didn't cause too much backlash. But now I've been able to do a lot more in sort of art, and I think it's really helped. Even just to like convey how I'm sort of feeling, sometimes it's good to sort of put it on a canvas.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people talk about things like journaling, don't they, as being really helpful. And I think maybe when you are a creative person, whether it's music or art or whatever that is, I think it can be quite helpful, can't it?
Yeah.
A good example of that was when the Long COVID Kids charity got permission to deliver letters to Downing Street. I don't know if you remember, it was the same day as all the protections and things were finally lifted and the testing ended in England and all that. And so the timing was kind of, it felt like a good time for these things to be delivered and for the kids to say, look, what are you doing for us? And Rosie didn't go, but there were a number of kids from the charity who went along with their parents or carers, and for a lot of them, they struggled. Rosie sent a letter, which was delivered by those guys. And then we heard nothing for quite a while. They were really upset by it, and Rosie just went straight to the canvas, didn't you, Rosie?
Yeah.
She just painted this big kind of blood-stained kind of howl of pain, which just said, it's not just in our heads. That's going to be one of the parts of her exhibition now that she's doing with the Long COVID Kids charity. So,
and that's so exciting. Do you want to talk about that a wee bit?
Yeah, I've got a gallery in December time. So one of the pieces that I'm doing is a big long series of canvases with one dot of paint for every kid in the UK with long COVID. So I've been working on that. It's taking a long time, but it's sort of coming together, and I think it'll be really sort of powerful to show sort of how many even just kids are suffering with long COVID.
Yeah, and for them to feel represented as well, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's coming back to this kids with long COVID or young people with long COVID, and that the people that were told that, you know, they'll be fine right from the start. And it's been quite hard to kind of shift that mantra, hasn't it? I mean, I definitely felt it myself when I'm a lot older than you, but that if you're, young, fit and healthy, you'll be fine. And I think, you know, a lot of what long COVID kids are doing and what you're doing with your artwork, it's bringing a bit more awareness to the fact that actually, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, you could be affected by this.
Yeah. And just to sort of show people that they're like not alone and there's other people as well.
There's raising awareness. There's also giving expression to what's inside, and that's a lot of what Rosie's doing is giving an outlet to how she feels and expressing it. And the exhibition isn't just her, of course. There's other people, and we've had submissions from various places. But in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to Lisbon, which is half an hour's drive away, to meet a girl Rosie's age who's coming from Austria with a couple of her artworks, which are going to go into the exhibition. Well, it's up to Rosie to choose. She's curating it, but I imagine, given the distance they're coming, it would be a bit rude not to put them in. And they're brilliant as well. We've already seen them, photographs. So we're creating connections as well, which is hugely important for people who are isolated.
Yeah, it really is. You know, I mean, I think when you're a young person and you're in a normal quote unquote situation, you know, you'd be in school all the time, you'd be socializing with your friends and all of these things, and it's just so difficult to do those things, isn't it, when you're not well and when energy is so precious. So yeah, isolation is definitely a thing. So it's absolutely wonderful that you've connected with other people across all sorts of boundaries as well. It's lovely.
Yeah.
So is the exhibition, is there any way that people can see it from, you know, not physically?
We're hoping that the BBC are going to come with cameras, so we might be able to share some snippets of that. We will be taking a lot of photographs, and Rosie certainly her eldest younger sister is a good photographer, so we'll get her to photograph the artwork in place as well, and maybe the event. So we'll be sharing that, I'm sure, on Rosie's Instagram and via Twitter, or just we try and make the most of everything we do, and I'm sure long COVID kids will be keen to have as much visibility to it as possible. So we'll probably write a blog, or there'll be something, so there will be a way for people to see the work.
Yeah, because it's such a lovely idea, and you know, it's obviously the culmination of a huge amount of work that you've put into it as well. And you know, only people with long COVID or other chronic illnesses will really understand what that really means to have put all that effort in when you're unwell, I think. But you must feel like it's worth it, like you get something out of it. And
yeah, I think it'll be good once I've got everything finished. It'll feel like a sort of an achievement to have done. So
it's an amazing thing to have achieved, you know, while ill and also at a young age as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very unusual for somebody of 17 to be leading an exhibition on their own. It's magnificent. And there are people who've been a big part in that. Rosie's art teacher, she was doing her A levels supposedly, and her art teacher said, "Look, you could really draw on this experience that you're having and use it and shape it as part of your work." And despite the fact that she could barely get to school and barely work for most of the year, she'd have managed to achieve a B grade. So that's magnificent. And I'm so proud of her for getting in,
It's fantastic.
We all are. It's been, a real battle. So it was a huge achievement just to submit the work, let alone anything else. And the fact that it happens to also be quite good, even though I'm biased,
It is. It's absolutely huge, and it's amazing.
The one thing that I would like, I suppose, to add is that we recently saw Rosie's consultant, and the experience of going to see a consultant who listens and thinks and was very honest. He said, Rosie, I don't really know what to do here, but I am not going to do nothing. We shouldn't sit on our hands. That was his phrase. So we will try things, which is exactly what he's done, and tried to arrange for tests that, based on the evidence that he's seen and things that I brought to him from Twitter as well, he considered and said, yes, okay, actually it might be worth trying that. So that openness is hugely important. And I think the first time Rosie saw him, do you remember what he said to you, Rosie?
No.
Put you on the spot there. He said, don't let anyone tell you that this isn't real. Okay, which I'm getting emotional again. It's strange how this happens. But for me, going to appointments and sometimes expecting it to be a battle, and to have someone who is actually receptive and understands and is prepared to listen and then act on what he hears is so important.
It really is, because there's nothing worse than, using all your energy and going to see somebody who, is supposed to be helping you, and then for them to turn around and just be dismissive or unhelpful or unsupportive. It makes everything else worse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There are lots of children and young people out there with long COVID and, going through this horrendous journey sort of alongside you. And I was just wondering if you had any sort of advice for anybody listening, especially maybe aimed at sort of children and young people, just kind of from your experiences.
Just to give yourself time, and it's hard because you have to be patient with yourself, but take all the little small wins that you get each day, and eventually they'll sort of figure out how to help us all exactly, and you just have to be patient.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's incredibly difficult, but yeah. Well, thank you both of you so much for joining me today, for your time and your energy. I know how precious that is, and it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you both. And all the best with recovery and also with the exhibition.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch